Welcome to the Data Quality Imperative, improving the scholarly publishing ecosystem. I'm Christopher Kenneally with Copyright Clearance Center, and I host our podcast series, Velocity of Content. Thomas Redman, who goes by the Data Doc on Twitter, wrote in the Harvard Business Review that you can't do anything important in your company without high-quality data. Redman advises us to get data right from the get-go. This new approach and the changes needed to make it happen must be step one, he wrote, for any leader serious about cultivating a data-driven mindset across the company. In publishing, open access is transforming the scholarly journal. In the laboratory and at the university, open science is remaking research. For this new open environment, best practices with data are those that strive to be efficient, transparent, and fair. That is, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. My guests this afternoon will share their insights on the impact that a strategic commitment to data quality can have on the people, processes, and technology in your publishing organization, as well as the entire research system, including authors, libraries, research institutions, and funders. I want to introduce who we have to speak today. On the far end for me is Sybille Geisenheyner. Sybille, welcome. Sybille is Director of Open Science Strategy and Licensing for the American Chemical Society, one of the world's largest scientific organizations with membership of over 151,000 people in 140 countries. And in the center here is my colleague, Laura Cox. Laura, welcome.
Thank you.
Laura is Senior Director of Publishing Industry Data for CCC. In May, CCC acquired Ringgold, a provider of persistent organization identifiers widely used by the scholarly communications industry. Laura Cox is a board member and treasurer of ISNI, an ISO standard and used by numerous libraries, publishers, databases, and rights management organizations around the world. And immediately to my right is Dr. Joe Havemann. Joe, welcome.
Thanks.
Joe is the founder and coordinating director at AfricaArXiv, the African Open Access Portal, with the mission to increase the discoverability of research achievements from and about Africa. Dr. Havemann holds a PhD in evolution and developmental biology and served in Nairobi, Kenya, with the UN Environmental Program Climate Change Adaptation Unit. She's currently a trainer and consultant in open science communication and digital science project management for Access to Perspectives. And I'd like to turn first to Sybille Geisenheyner. And when we're thinking about data in the scholarly publishing ecosystem, research is first. But it seems that data is a very close second, and it's much more a part of the publisher's job than ever before.
Yes, and I think the big question mark is, what does data mean in general? So you have research data, you have publishing data, and a lot of data in the house as well. And I think, at least from a publisher perspective, we, well, some of us, or many of us, just realized in the last couple of years how much data we actually have and what we can do with it and how we can approach customers, if it is the researcher, the institution, or a funder, with the data we have in-house.
Right, and it's really about creating a more efficient, more effective workflow, isn't it? So all those different touch points along the way from the submission to the publication and after that.
Yes, I mean, as scientific society, for us, the researcher is always in the center. The researcher as a reader, so as a consumer, or as an author, like a producer, it's really in the center of what we are doing. And to create workflows for the researcher, to make it as easy as possible for him to either create content or consume content is really, simply a key thing to do.
And in the world of transformative agreements, it's also about communication. You have to be able to work with the researcher as well, right? It's a two-way process.
Yes, absolutely. Those deals, and maybe some people have seen the presentation before about transformative agreements, those arrangements between institutions and publishers are getting more and more complex by adding like a publishing element to a former reading or subscription agreement. And this is really complex. in what we are doing. It starts by really, when a researcher submits an article, to really see, is that researcher covered or affiliated with a read and publish institution? So to really give him the right direction right from the beginning of the process. This is your way to go. Or if they are not in an agreement, if they have a certain funder, for example, with a certain mandate applied, to really direct them through the right spot in the system. This is the way for you to be compliant with your mandate, and this is the right way to check out of the system when your article is accepted. And for that, you really need big data resources.
Right, and the obligation is on the publisher to collect all this data, but there's also an obligation for the researcher too, to be sure from the get-go that they are delivering the right kind of information. It will have an impact on their work, but it will also have an impact on their audience.
Yes, absolutely. This is why you need standardized registries like Ringgold, for example, where people know out of a list of institutions, this is mine, this is the one I need to pick to be recognized as affiliated with that institution, and not free flow and put something in which really ends up with the list of different name variations. And so to have those implemented, those quality checkpoints more or less, right from the beginning is really key.
Right, and so it's important to the researcher, to the reader, but it's also important to ACS because you are watching this data, it's informing you about these agreements, how well they're working, whether they're achieving the objectives that they have. You need to have high quality data at that side too, because it's going to matter in negotiations and the way you plan for future agreements. Yeah,
absolutely. And for example, the most recent deal we did in the second quarter of this year with the California consortia. It's 3 consortia actually combining. There is not just to capture the correct data, it's also triggering the right communication, because it is a complete different setting of having possible funder involvement and all that. And to combine all this, you need really to have systems who are capable and agile enough, more or less, to really have that fine-tuning on the individual situation of an agreement. Because this is definitely something we learned over the last couple of years, that all these deals, read and publish agreements, have a different flavor from one to the other. But this is something the researcher shouldn't worry about. They should have the same author experience coming through the system, knowing that in the background people take care that they are really doing the right thing at the right moment.
Right. To your point about the variety of transformative agreements, I'm fond of saying that transformative agreements are like marriages and snowflakes. There are no two alike.
Yeah, no.
So for ACS, that's a real challenge.
Yeah, not just for us. I think that's for everyone, and it's also from an institution perspective. They have 10 agreements with 10 publishers, and all of them have different variations, and so also that data, to keep track of that, what am I allowed with this agreement, or what is the demand from that agreement? This is also from all perspectives, from a publisher perspective, but as well from an institutional perspective, key.
Right, and Sybille Geisenheyner, finally, about the real interest that we have more than ever to make the research ecosystem a global ecosystem, truly a global one, and be able to include researchers and communities from all parts of the world. Does high quality data play a role in ACS's interactions with the various regions of the planet?
Yeah. I mean, that's from what we can read out of the agreements we have in place, that is absolutely key, and we would want to include and not exclude. That's right. Really something we are looking for. That's not always possible, but that's definitely something we're trying to do. And to have really the funder involvement there much more on the front allows us to be much more global in a way, because funders act global. They in many ways not just fund in a certain country. I mean, research is a global endeavor, so you have a lot of different authors on a paper from very different institutions, from all parts of the globe, and to make them, to enable them to be compliant with all they are asked for is really key, and this is why we need those data, this is why we need those connections, and it's a constantly evolving environment.
All right, well, Sybille Geisenheyner with ACS, thank you. And I want to turn to my colleague Laura Cox at CCC. And, you know, CCC has a longstanding interest in quality data. It's important to our rights licensing programs as well as RightsLink, our open access solution. So does the acquisition of Ringgold signal that CCC believes this issue of data quality is really more important than ever?
Absolutely. I mean, we're moving into, as Sybille says quite rightly, into a much more complex environment as we gradually transition to open access and open science. And so the issues around data, the quality of the data, the accuracy of the data, the ability to link data becomes more and more important. So as we're moving into read and publish deals, as Sybille says, both sides of the negotiation need to have the right data. The publisher needs to know which components of an institution are included in the read part as existing licensees, and which are publishing open access, possibly through an APC model, and who's paying for that APC. Because if it's the funder paying, then should it be part of the construct for the library, and there'll be a conversation about that. So actually understanding who the author is with a persistent ID, like an ORCID or an ISNI, where they're affiliated in the hierarchy of an institution, to know whether it's included in any transformative deal with a Ringgold ID or a RAW or an ISNI is really important. And then we're tying all that information together to produce the transformative deals that further this effort to move to open access, which everyone is behind. But we also need some of the data to start being the less burden on the researcher, because they're still having to input a lot of this information, and it's still difficult. And it really needs to start earlier in the process, in the funding process, in the grant application process, and for persistent IDs particularly to flow with that downstream and throughout the cycle, and then you can pull back to analytics.
Yeah, and so talk, Laura Cox, about the role that high-quality data can play in facilitating collaboration, because, as you say, the farther up the stream we move to really the very beginning of the process really means that the relationships become, I would imagine, more fluid, right? And so that's going to create opportunities for collaboration. Well,
there's all sorts of opportunities in different settings as well. So it's collaborative, but it's also improvement of efficiencies. So there's a European national funder who have integrated persistent IDs of all flavours into their national curriculum system, their CV CRIS system, their CRIS system, and then filter that down to the local institutions' CRIS systems. And it's saved 90,000 hours of administration across that country a year in research. And that's pretty phenomenal. And then that data, if it filters through to the publisher, saves a lot of the pain points where we're experiencing data, missing it because of some kind of piece of workflow where it's not passed through, or where something has been, misused, put in the wrong place, and then data is having to be rebuilt. So we're having to add the persistent IDs back into the system, which really should just flow through continuously throughout the life cycle.
Yeah, and publishers with these various agreements, they're under pressure.
Yes.
Because the funders are expecting compliance, they're expecting compliance from the authors, from the researchers, but that responsibility does sort of bleed into the publishing world.
It does, and it's complicated because funders have a variety of mandates. They use different terminology and language to mean similar things in their mandates. We haven't got any standards set around how we communicate that through into systems to enable authors to make the right choices about the journal that they're selecting, or in the cases where they have multiple funding sources, those funding mandates can actually be quite different and occasionally conflict. So actually passing more information into the user experience of the system to enable researchers to select journals, to ensure that they're following the mandate, and for all of that information to then go back to the funder to say, yep, this is all where you wanted it, and the data set is posted, and we have the protocols and all of the other pieces.
Right, and you mentioned the case of the European University Consortium or organization, and the achievement of saving 90,000 hours of what could be research time or time better spent otherwise at the university. But this also has a commercial benefit as well, and Sybille's mentioned some of that. But tell us a little bit more about the role that quality data plays in this ambition to have organizations be data driven and to be making decisions around data.
So, I mean, you've described to me anyway, Chris, in the past as data as being a bit blurry. And so we add metadata to it. So we have descriptions of that data. And then when we add persistent IDs, we bring it into focus. And those persistent IDs are interoperable. And that's the key word, is that we're creating something that is a permanent piece of information that can be linked from one thing to another. So we can look at collaborations. How often does author A collaborate with author B, and which institutions that, and what are they working on, and who's funding them? This is all information that plays back into the system and drives decision, it enables decision making rather than things being slightly obfuscated.
Right, and finally, Laura Cox, the publishing ecosystem, the word I'm fond of using today, is less and less focused only on the journal or the journal article. It's interested in all sorts of parts of the research life cycle. And does quality data matter there as well?
Yes. I think it's all part of the same process, and we really need to start with, we've got the grant applications, we've got the process that we're going through, we're undertaking research, we're creating data sets, we have methodology, where we're generating preprints, then there's submission processes, there's access to those articles, there's usage, there's citation, and ultimately analytics that help us understand impact, and whether we're meeting diversity and inclusion goals or sustainable development goals, and look at those sorts of things that genuinely benefit society throughout the system.
Well, that's an important point, isn't it? Impact, that's what funders want to know, that's what the researchers want to know, everybody involved really wants to know what difference they're making, right? Laura Cox, thank you. And I want to turn finally to Joe Havemann, and tell us about AfricaArXiv, and particularly how data really matters in this objective you have to bring African research and African researchers to the world.
Yeah, thanks so much. I want to acknowledge also all my colleagues in Africa who cannot be here with us today. First and foremost, also Joy Wango, who is a dear colleague and also partner institution to AfricaArXiv, which is also our umbrella organization, the Training Center for Communication in Nairobi, Kenya. And so AfricaArXiv was founded in 2018 to increase discoverability of African research output. Because what we see in the digital indexing databases is only what's discoverable through the persistent identifiers and algorithms that have been built in a Western context. And that's historically explainable and nothing to criticize. History has played how it's played. And now our approach is, okay, what infrastructure exists that can also be utilized by researchers from around the world, because it has a global mandate, as you also said, the Chemical Society has. So our idea was to initiate, to use existing infrastructure to encourage African scholars to disseminate their work as preprints, postprints, whatever research output they have, data sets, anything they can share, have a DOI assigned, like the first persistent identifier, then preferably also sign up with their ORCID ID, the other one, and also have an institution affiliation identifier. Now you've partnered with Ringgold, there's also RR. There's some complementary aspects between the two. So the idea with there's also other like researcher identifiers other than ORCID, and they all have their reason for existence and can complement each other nicely. So by using these identifiers and infrastructures and technology behind, we saw a chance, and that's also nicely playing out now in its 5th year, how we can boost, like almost overnight, the discoverability of, in our case, African research output, and thereby change the narrative from, oh, what we see might only be less than 0.1%, but it's actually more, because a lot is still in print, a lot is not discoverable, because it's sitting on institutional repositories without internet connection, without the persistent identifiers and other standards to make it discoverable to the international databases and algorithms. So this is basically where we are plugging in to acknowledge and build on the existing infrastructure in the region to map, like we've done a mapping exercise over like 2 years, which is continuously growing, to map what research output is being archived, where in the world and where across the continent, how discoverable is it already to our well-known and not so well-known discovery databases. So there's also a variety thereof, not only the usual suspect go-to references. So yeah, we're informing about all of that really, and talking to all kinds of stakeholders on the continent, internationally, like also Africa is international with 54 countries, but also on a global scale to see what we can learn from other world regions. Latin America, there's a huge open access experience over many decades. They've basically pivoted and piloted and pioneered the whole open access movement ever since, I think, the past 30 years or so, longer, and are now also kind of experiencing the same challenges as everywhere else. But I think we're on a good pathway here, and I also want to acknowledge what you said. Like I appreciate what you said in terms of it has to be simple and easy for the researcher, because they're there to do research and not have to boggle around with all kinds of technologies. And of course, they're also responsible to add the content-specific metadata, and that's what I'm also teaching with Access to Perspectives. Data management, research project management, fair data, care data, also considering things like who's responsible, who owns the data before, during, and after the project, who's responsible for maintenance, and to inform the data set with the required metadata. But I should maybe take a break here.
And Joe Havemann, so we've been hearing from the others about the importance of impact, and you tell that story, and I have to imagine that it's having a tremendous impact for the African researchers themselves, for the institutions. Tell us a bit on the ground, what's it like for them to have this resource and to use and to have that resource to then become part of other resources, other databases?
Well, what I said in the past 2 minutes sounds really exciting, and you're thinking that we thought, oh, this is easy to adopt as a concept. Turns out there's a lot of reservation when it comes to preprints, postprints, sharing your research output anywhere else than a peer-reviewed publisher or journal. And that's an experience we are not only making across Africa, but the whole researcher community has that reservation. And I can only tell you, as we also said before when we spoke, preprints are here to stay, and they're being established as part of the publishing workflow as we speak. The publishers are already on it. And the funders are already demanding it, like increasingly so. It's just that people like myself and Joy with the training center, like what's missing or what we need more of to inform also now the practicing researchers of the opportunities that preprint publishing and following a preprint substantiated, community-based peer review, and then also like editorial through journal publishing and layouting and typesetting. And curation, I think that's the most important task for the journalism and publishing industry. The curation of the masses of data that are being produced across all disciplines now. Like we've never seen so much, and that needs to be curated.
Right, and I think maybe a good way to end is on that very point about the as we evolve, we are seeing many more relationships created. There's a sort of interrelationships become more important. Interdisciplinary research becomes more important. Is that how you see it?
Totally. I mean, AfricaArXiv is interdisciplinary by its nature because we chose the focus on the region, like regional focus. And it enables interdisciplinary research, also cross-regional. We're also multilingual. By nature, we accept submissions from any language of the world, and that's also thankfully, we observe many publishers also adopt that concept to make not only interdisciplinary, but also breaking the language barriers in many ways, and very efficiently so. And much of that can be seen here in the second floor. If you come and join us in the scientific publishing level. So many publishers and service providers are facilitating that, and yes, it's crucial for impact. And when we talk about impact, there's unfortunately a misconception for a high impact factor journal fact. Sorry. So the impact factor for the journals is not what we, I think also not what you were referring to, but what societal impact can research actually have? Like, why are we doing research in the first place? It's to acquire knowledge, but then what? We have urgent challenges to solve here. And research has all the answers, and we just need to make sense of the results that the researchers have generated, where we come back to the persistent identifiers and the curation. And so we're on a good path, I would say.
All right, well, Joe Havemann, thank you for that background on AfricaArXiv. We have a few minutes left. I don't know if we do have any questions from the audience here. Anyone want to comment? Well, we learned a lot, and I appreciate the contributions of my panel. Sybille Geisenheyner with American Chemical Society, Laura Cox with CCC, Joe Havemann with AfricaArXiv, and Access to Perspectives. And I appreciate you joining us today. I'll mention that a Nobel laureate once said that if you torture your data long enough, it'll tell you anything. But my advice is that treat your data well, it will return the favor. All right? My name's Chris Kenneally with CCC. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.